It was her. I saw her take it.
How could you do this? We trusted you!
Confess. Tell us where it is.
For over 40 years, she gave her life to a family that not her own. She cooked their meals, cleaned their home, and raised their children as if they were her blood. She never asked for much in return, only respect, only kindness. But when a priceless wristwatch went missing, the most expensive possession of the wealthy patriarch, all her years of loyalty meant nothing. In an instant, the old woman became the perfect scapegoat. Accused of theft, shamed by the very people she had served, she was dragged into court like a criminal. Reporters mocked her, neighbors whispered, and even the children she had once rocked to sleep turned their faces away. She stood there, old, tired, humiliated, fighting not only for her freedom but for the last piece of dignity she had left. Everyone believed she was guilty. Everyone, except for one. A 10-year-old boy, shy and often silent, who had always struggled to speak, carried the truth inside him. He was the only one who saw what really happened that day. The only one who knew the old woman's innocence. And though no one expected it, his voice, fragile, broken, but filled with love for the woman who once cared for him, would soon shatter the lies of the rich and save her life. This is not just a story about a missing watch. It is about betrayal, cruelty, and the quiet courage of a child who refused to stay silent. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because today, you are about to witness how justice, though delayed, can still be found in the unlikeliest of voices. The gavel struck the wooden block with a sharp crack, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like a final judgment. "All rise," the bailiff commanded, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to press against the walls. Everyone stood as the judge entered, her robes flowing like a shadow. The air was thick, crowded with journalists clutching their pens, families whispering into one another's ears, and the buzzing tension of scandal. At the center of it all stood Miss Eleanor Johnson, a woman of 68 years, with silver threads streaking through her tightly coiled hair. Her back, though weary, was still straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her as though she were about to serve a meal rather than stand trial for a crime she did not commit. For over 4 decades, Eleanor had cooked for the Whitmore family. She had fed them through heartbreak and celebrations, through births and funerals, through late-night cravings and grand feasts. She had been there when the family's youngest son Matthew was born, and she had rocked him when he cried louder than anyone could bear. She had been there when little Aaron, the stammering child of the eldest Whitmore son, struggled to form his first words. She had been there through it all, invisible but indispensable. And now, after a lifetime of service, Eleanor was accused of stealing the patriarch's prized possession, a rare Swiss wristwatch worth more than Eleanor had ever earned in her entire career. The irony was almost unbearable. "Mrs. Johnson," the judge began, her voice cool and detached, "you stand accused of theft, of betraying the trust of the Whitmore family after years of service. How do you plead?" Eleanor lifted her head, her dark eyes steady though her heart trembled. She spoke slowly, her voice soft yet firm, "Not guilty, Your Honor. I have never stolen anything in my life." From the gallery, whispers erupted. Some muttered that she looked too calm to be innocent. Others shook their heads, remembering the headlines splashed across yesterday's papers. "Longtime servant betrays family she raised." At the prosecution's table, Matthew Whitmore, the youngest son, sat with an expression of cold satisfaction. His blonde hair was slicked back, his suit pressed to perfection, and his lips curled slightly in the corner. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something that made the man chuckle softly. Eleanor's eyes flickered toward him, and for the first time she felt a tremor of rage beneath her sorrow. That boy, no, that man, was the reason she stood there today. She had watched him grow from a child who demanded too much sugar in his cereal to a young man with too much arrogance in his smile. She had known he was trouble long before the others saw it. But even she had not expected this cruelty. The prosecution rose and launched into their argument. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not complicated. A watch worth over $100,000 went missing. Only a handful of people had access to the patriarch's study. Mrs. Johnson, the cook, was one of them. When the watch could not be found, who had motive? Who needed money more than she did? Who had opportunity? The answer is clear." As the lawyer spoke, the wealthy family sat like statues. Charles Whitmore, the father, adjusted his cufflinks with rigid precision, refusing to meet Eleanor's eyes. His wife dabbed her handkerchief against her nose as though the very scandal made her ill. Matthew sat smugly, while Aaron, the 10-year-old boy with hesitant speech, sat with wide, troubled eyes beside his father. Eleanor glanced at Aaron briefly and her heart ached. He was the only one in that grand, heartless family who ever seemed to see her as human. She had spent countless afternoons in the kitchen with him, coaxing him to say new words, listening patiently as he stumbled through syllables. He would sit on a stool and peel carrots with clumsy hands while she hummed old hymns. He had been her joy in that house of glass smiles. Now he sat silent, his little fists clenched in his lap. The defense lawyer, a young woman named Naomi Brooks, stood up. She was new, barely older than Matthew, and her nervousness showed in the way she shuffled her papers. But when she spoke, her voice carried conviction. Eleanor Johnson has worked for the Whitmore family for 40 years. She has no record, no history of dishonesty, and no evidence ties her to this theft except for convenience. It is easier to accuse a servant than to look within one's own house. And that, she said, pausing to let her words sink in, is precisely what has happened here. The courtroom buzzed. Some scoffed. Others nodded. Eleanor kept her gaze steady on the table in front of her, but inside she felt the old familiar sting, being invisible, her loyalty erased in a moment of scandal. Then a small sound broke her thoughts. It was Aaron. The boy had shifted in his seat. His lips moved silently as though he were trying to speak. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Eleanor, not his family. His father nudged him gently, whispering something that made him shrink back. But Eleanor had seen it, the struggle, the desire to say something. Her pulse quickened. Did he know? Had he seen? Matthew too had noticed. For a fleeting second, a shadow of unease crossed his arrogant expression. He glanced at his nephew, then quickly masked his concern with a smirk. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs with exaggerated calm, as though daring anyone to question him. But Eleanor caught it. That tiny flicker of fear. That was the crack in his armor. The hearing stretched on. The prosecution presented evidence that was more assumption than proof. Eleanor listened as strangers dissected her life, reducing her to a desperate thief. She felt her dignity stripped away with every accusation, every cold glance from the family she had loved like her own. And yet, amid the storm, her eyes returned again and again to the boy. Aaron's small hands twisted together. His lips moved without sound as if words were trapped behind a locked door. His eyes, dark and shimmering, darted between Eleanor and Matthew. Something inside Eleanor stirred, a fragile, desperate hope. When the judge finally announced a recess, Eleanor felt her legs tremble. The bailiff led her back toward the holding room, but as she passed the benches she caught Aaron's gaze one more time. This time he mouthed something clearly. 2 words. I saw. Eleanor's breath caught. Her knees almost gave way. She turned, but the bailiff pulled her along before she could respond. Behind her, Matthew's eyes narrowed as he noticed the silent exchange. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since the trial began, his smile faltered. The tables were not yet turned. But something had shifted. And Eleanor knew then, with a trembling certainty, that the truth had a voice, even if it came from a boy who struggled to speak. The clang of the courtroom door closing behind her echoed like a prison gate. Eleanor was led down the narrow corridor to the holding room, her wrists aching from the firm grip of the bailiff. She stumbled slightly, the weight of exhaustion dragging at her bones, but she forced herself upright. She would not give Matthew the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Inside the holding room, the fluorescent light flickered above her head. The walls were gray, cold, and unforgiving. A metal chair sat in the corner, and Eleanor lowered herself onto it, her hands trembling as they clasped together. She tried to pray, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered to herself, like she used to when Aaron was small and frightened in the kitchen. Be still, child. Truth always finds a way. But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. What if the truth never came? What if the family she had poured her life into succeeded in burying her beneath their wealth and lies? She had no money, no influence, no power. Just her word, and to them her word was worth nothing. She closed her eyes and thought of Aaron's lips moving. I saw. The words replayed in her mind over and over. Could it be true? Had he really witnessed what happened? The boy was gentle, hesitant, often mocked even by his own cousins for his stammer. But Eleanor had always believed in him, had always seen more in his silence than anyone else cared to. If he had seen something, perhaps, just perhaps, hope was not lost. Meanwhile, in the Whitmore lounge just outside the courtroom, Matthew paced like a restless predator. His jaw was tight, his fingers tugging at his cufflinks until the fabric frayed. His brother, Richard, Aaron's father, sat stiffly beside him, avoiding his eyes. What's wrong with the boy? Matthew hissed, leaning toward Richard. His voice was low but sharp enough to cut. He was moving his lips at her, whispering like he had some secret. You need to control him. Richard's brows furrowed. He's 10 years old, Matthew. He hardly speaks a word to anyone. You're overreacting. Overreacting? Matthew's smile was tight, almost manic. That boy has been coddled too long. If he says something stupid. He stopped himself, glancing around at the reporters lingering near the hall. Then, lowering his voice, he muttered, "Make sure he understands to keep his mouth shut." Richard said nothing. Deep down he doubted his son would speak at all. But Matthew's unease did not go unnoticed. For the first time, Richard wondered what his younger brother was so afraid of. Inside the courtroom, little Aaron sat beside his nanny, his small hands twisting the hem of his jacket. His eyes were fixed on the door where Eleanor had been led away. He could still see her face etched with sorrow, yet shining with a strange, fragile hope when he mouthed those two words. He hadn't meant to let them slip, but seeing her dragged like a criminal had broken something in him. Now he sat trembling. Should he say it again? Should he try? But the words were heavy in his chest, locked behind the same door that had silenced him for years. His throat tightened, and when he opened his mouth, only a soft squeak escaped. The nanny hushed him, patting his hand gently, but Aaron's frustration grew. He wanted to shout, to scream, to tell the world what he had seen. He had been there. He had seen Uncle Matthew slip into grandfather's study late that night, seen the drawer opened, seen the gleam of the watch before it disappeared into Matthew's pocket. And then the cruel chuckle. "You won't tell anyone, will you? You can't even speak." Those words had burned into his heart like fire. For days he had kept silent, too afraid, too unsure. But now Eleanor's freedom depended on him. And Aaron loved Eleanor. She was the only one who had ever sat with him patiently when his words tangled into knots. She was the one who showed him how to peel potatoes when others mocked his clumsy fingers. She was the one who told him he was not broken, just different. To him she was more than the cook. She was his safe place, his second grandmother. As the recess ended, the courtroom filled again. The air was heavier now, charged with anticipation. The prosecution seemed confident, their files stacked neatly on the desk. Matthew leaned back in his chair with feigned calm, but Eleanor noticed the tapping of his foot, the way his eyes darted toward Aaron again and again. She sat straighter, her heart pounding as the bailiff guided her back to the stand. She looked at Aaron once more, and in that fleeting glance, something passed between them, a silent promise. But just as the defense prepared to resume, the judge's sharp voice cut through the murmurs. "This court will proceed. The prosecution may continue." Matthew's lawyer rose, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Your Honor, we all know what is at stake. The patriarch's watch, a priceless heirloom, gone. And here we have Mrs. Johnson, who had free access to the study, and more financial need than any of us can imagine. Opportunity, motive, and history align perfectly." He turned deliberately toward Eleanor, his smile thin. "Tell us again, Mrs. Johnson, why should this court believe you over the word of the Whitmore family?" The words pierced her like daggers. She inhaled deeply, gripping the wooden edge of the stand. Her voice shook, but she forced the truth out. "Because I have given this family my life. 40 years. I raised their children, I buried my own youth in their service. If loyalty means nothing, then let me fall guilty. But I will not stand here and confess to a crime I did not commit." The room stirred with murmurs. Some scoffed, others looked away uncomfortably. And all the while Aaron's small hand clenched tighter around his sleeve. His lips trembled, shaping words that refused to come. He looked at his uncle, smug, confident, untouchable, then at Eleanor, who stood fragile yet unbroken. Inside him a storm raged. He wanted to speak. He needed to speak. And as the tension mounted, as the trial twisted into a performance of lies and wealth, a single thought thundered in Aaron's heart. If I stay silent, she will be destroyed. If I speak, I might be destroyed. But if I do nothing, I lose her forever. His lips parted. A sound began to form. And Matthew's eyes snapped toward him, sharp and dangerous, as though he sensed the shift. Eleanor followed his gaze, and her heart leapt. The silence of a child was about to become the most powerful weapon in the room. The gavel cracked once more, pulling the courtroom back into its grim rhythm. The air seemed thicker now, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. All eyes returned to the witness stand, where Eleanor sat like a ship battered by waves but still upright, still refusing to sink. The prosecution's lawyer straightened his tie, then approached, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. "Mrs. Johnson," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the false charm of someone used to being believed, "you claim 40 years of loyalty. But isn't it true that loyalty means little when a person's pockets are empty? A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery. Eleanor's face burned, but she lifted her chin. I may be poor, sir, she said, her voice trembling yet steady, but I am not a thief. The lawyer arched a brow, savoring the tension. Not a thief? And yet the watch is gone. Gone from a room you had every reason to enter. Are you asking this court to believe that some invisible hand took it? That perhaps it grew legs and walked away on its own? The audience chuckled again and Eleanor's heart clenched. She could feel their judgment pressing down on her shoulders like chains. She looked toward the Whitmore family bench, but there was no mercy there. Charles Whitmore's stern face was turned away, his wife dabbed her eyes as though she were the victim, and Matthew lounged like a king watching a jester perform. Only Aaron's gaze met hers. The boy's lips twitched, his fists balled tightly in his lap. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, and then, for the first time in weeks, a word tried to escape. The sound was faint, barely more than a whisper, but Eleanor heard it. Her breath caught. She saw his mouth forming the word again, saw. The nanny beside him hushed him quickly, placing a firm hand on his arm. Not now, Aaron, she whispered. Richard, his father, glanced down sharply, shaking his head in warning. Matthew's head snapped toward the boy, his smirk slipping for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed into a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Aaron froze, his throat closing up like a trap. He sank back into his seat, silenced once more. Eleanor's heart twisted. She had heard enough to know he was trying. He wanted to tell them. But in this courtroom, the voice of a child, especially one who struggled to speak, was as fragile as a candle flame in the wind. The judge rapped the gavel again. Order. Let's proceed. The prosecution turned back to Eleanor, seizing the moment. Mrs. Johnson, I put it to you plainly, if you are not guilty, then who is? Who else would have taken that watch? Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. She could not accuse Matthew without proof. To point a finger at him without evidence would only make her look desperate, bitter, mad. She shook her head slowly. I don't know, she whispered. The lawyer spread his arms dramatically. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. She cannot explain, she cannot defend herself. The simplest answer is the truest one, she took it. The crowd erupted in murmurs again. Reporters scribbled furiously, headlines already forming in their minds. Eleanor bowed her head, her hands trembling in her lap. Naomi Brooks, her young defense attorney, shot to her feet. Objection. This is speculation, not evidence. Overruled, the judge said firmly. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she pressed on. Your Honor, may I remind the court that my client has served this family faithfully for 4 decades? That in all those years she has never once been accused of dishonesty? We are not here to speculate on what is convenient, but to determine the truth. Her words were strong, but Eleanor could see the flicker of fear in Naomi's eyes. She was losing ground. Eleanor could feel it too, the tide of the room turning against her, ready to drag her under. And still Aaron sat there, his small hands shaking, his lips moving in silent desperation. I saw. But no sound came. Matthew leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, his gaze fixed on Eleanor with predatory calm. Then casually he glanced at Aaron again, his smirk returning. He mouthed something across the courtroom, so quick and subtle only Aaron could see it. Quiet. Or else. Aaron's body stiffened. His breath hitched and he turned his face away, pressing his forehead against his father's sleeve. Richard barely noticed, too preoccupied with the shame of the trial. But Eleanor noticed. She saw it all, the silent threat, the boy's fear, the crushing weight that forced his words back down his throat. And her heart ached with both rage and helplessness. The hours dragged on. More so-called evidence was presented, a maid claiming she had seen Eleanor near the study that night, though her memory wavered under questioning. A jeweler who confirmed the value of the missing watch, emphasizing just how much was at stake. Each word, each testimony was like a stone added to the pile meant to bury her alive. By the time the judge called for an adjournment for the day, Eleanor felt hollow. Her body ached, her spirit strained. She rose slowly, her legs heavy as the bailiff came to escort her back. But just before she was led away, she looked once more at Aaron. The boy's eyes were brimming with tears, his lips still forming that same desperate phrase. I saw. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor smiled at him. Not a smile of joy but of faith. A silent message passed between them. You are my hope. Do not give up. Matthew saw it too. His jaw tightened, his smirk faltering once more. He leaned back in his chair, but the faint twitch of his fingers betrayed the truth. He was rattled. The recess ended the day's battle, but the war was far from over. Eleanor was closer than ever to being condemned, yet something had shifted. The boy's silence was breaking. And Matthew knew it. The courtroom felt colder that morning. A chill ran through the chamber as if the walls themselves had grown weary of swallowing lies. The gallery was packed once again, reporters eager, cameras flashing, each lens waiting to capture the downfall of an old black woman accused of stealing from the very family she had served for more than 40 years. Eleanor Johnson stood at the defense table, her frame weary but her eyes still holding that glimmer of stubborn light. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she would not let them see fear. She had endured too much humiliation already. She had been branded a thief, spat on by whispers, crushed by the very hands she had once held steady as children. Today it seemed would be the day they broke her for good. The judge entered with her usual stern grace. "This court is now in session," she declared, her voice sharp and decisive. The prosecution wasted no time. Their lawyer strode confidently to the center of the room, turning toward the jury with a smile designed to appear reassuring but dripping with smug certainty. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of this matter," he said, pacing slowly. "The watch is gone. It has not magically reappeared. And while the defense has offered sympathy and sentiment, they have not given you a shred of alternative explanation. What we do have is opportunity, access, and motive, all pointing to Mrs. Eleanor Johnson. This is not a fairy tale. It is reality. And in reality, poor servants do not resist temptation when priceless treasures lie before them." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. The cruelty in his words burned, but she would not cry. Not here. Not now. Naomi Brooks, her young defense lawyer, rose. Her voice was steady though her hands shook. "Your Honor, members of the jury, do not mistake loyalty and faith for weakness. Mrs. Johnson has stood accused because it is easier to target the powerless than to confront the truth. You are being asked to condemn a woman whose life has been one long act of service, without proof, without evidence, simply because she does not have wealth or influence. If justice is to mean anything in this room, you must demand more than convenience. You must demand truth." The judge nodded slightly. "Very well. We will proceed to final deliberations." The jury began to shift in their seats. Eleanor's chest tightened. This was it. This was how it would end, with her fate in the hands of strangers, while the real thief sat smugly a few feet away. And then a sound broke the silence. A small, fragile voice. Heads turned. Whispers spread instantly. All eyes landed on Aaron, the 10-year-old boy sitting stiffly beside his father. His face was pale, his lips trembling, but his eyes burned with something fierce, something desperate. He clutched the hem of his jacket with shaking hands. Richard, his father, leaned down quickly. "Aaron, hush," he whispered sharply. But Aaron did not hush. He swallowed hard, his throat working, his lips moving again. "I saw." The courtroom froze. Eleanor's eyes widened, her heart racing. She had heard it before, faint and broken, but now it was loud enough for everyone. The boy's voice cracked, fragile but undeniable. Matthew reacted instantly. He leaned forward, his voice sharp and cutting. "He doesn't know what he's saying. The boy is confused, he hardly speaks." But Aaron stood. His small body shook as though every word was a battle, but he did not sit back down. His fists clenched at his sides, his eyes locked on Eleanor first, then swung toward his uncle. "I saw him." The words came out louder this time, trembling but unstoppable. The gallery erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled to their feet, cameras clicking like gunfire. Gasps and shouts filled the room as the judge pounded her gavel, demanding order. Matthew's face drained of color. He leapt to his feet. "This is ridiculous. He's just a child. He's lying." But Aaron's voice, broken and halting, rose again, louder than before. "Uncle. Matthew. He took it. I saw him." The words ripped through the courtroom like thunder. The boy's voice cracked, but his finger pointed straight at Matthew, unwavering. His eyes, filled with tears but blazing with courage, locked on the man who had taunted him in the shadows of the study. "I saw him take grandfather's watch." The room exploded. Some shouted in disbelief, others cried out in support. The judge struck her gavel over and over, but the storm would not be calmed. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs flared, the gallery buzzed with electric shock. Matthew's composure shattered. His arrogance slipped and panic took its place. His words tumbled out, sharp and frantic. "He's making it up. He's just a boy, he can't even talk properly. You can't believe him over me. But the more he protested, the more his mask cracked. His eyes darted, his hands twitched, his once flawless calm dissolved into anger and fear. Eleanor sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. The boy she had once cradled in the kitchen, who had peeled potatoes at her side and whispered broken words into her patient ears, was now her savior. His voice, the very voice mocked and dismissed by his own family, had become her deliverance. The judge raised her hand for silence. Slowly the room obeyed. Her eyes fixed firmly on Aaron. "Young man," she said gently, "you understand the importance of what you are saying? You are under oath now. Do you swear to tell the truth?" Aaron's lips trembled, but his chin lifted bravely. "What, yes. I saw him." Naomi stepped forward quickly. "Your Honor, this boy is the witness we have been waiting for. His testimony is clear. He saw the defendant's nephew in the study taking the watch. This cannot be ignored." The prosecution sputtered, but the tide had turned. The jury's eyes, once hard and doubtful, now flicked nervously toward Matthew. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Maybe the old woman was innocent. Maybe the boy is telling the truth. Matthew lunged forward, his composure finally snapping. "He's lying. He's just a dumb kid who can't even speak properly. You can't take his word over mine." The judge's gavel slammed down, her voice like steel. "Enough, Mr. Whitmore." Silence fell heavy and absolute. In that silence, Eleanor lifted her head. Her voice, soft but unshakable, carried across the courtroom. "You see, Your Honor, the truth was always here. It only needed the courage of a child to speak it." The jury deliberated, but it took less than an hour. When they returned, the verdict rang out clear and undeniable. "Not guilty." The words washed over Eleanor like a wave of light. She bowed her head, tears spilling freely now, her body trembling with relief. She was free. Not just from the charge, but from the chains of lies that had bound her. Matthew was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his protests falling on deaf ears. His mask of arrogance lay shattered at his feet. As the gallery erupted in noise, Eleanor's gaze turned to Aaron. The boy sat in his seat, his chest heaving, tears streaking his cheeks. She crossed the room as quickly as her old legs would carry her and knelt before him, cupping his small trembling hands in hers. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved me." Aaron looked up at her, and for the first time in his life, his words came out without stammer or hesitation. "You believed in me." The room around them faded for a moment. It was just them, the old woman and the boy, bound not by blood but by love, loyalty, and truth. The cameras captured it. The world watched. And for once, justice had been served. And if you've stayed with us until this point, thank you. Stories like this remind us that truth and courage can come from the unlikeliest of places, and that even in the darkest moments, justice can still shine through. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of honesty. Like this video if you believe in standing up for the truth, no matter the cost. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story we bring to life.